afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. The noonday gun has just gone off here in our Cape Town studio where we're based, and it signals the start of our weekly webinar. My name is Neil Peterson. I'm the founder and content-in-chief of Real Estate Investor. That's South Africa's leading independent real estate content and education platform. For more than 16 years, and we're really passionate about serving the South African real estate investor, the industry, business community through our digital platforms, rei.co.za, our monthly digital magazine, Real Estate Investor, and our webinars and in-person events. So welcome to our regular Thursday investment webinar brought to you by Real Estate Investor. I'm really delighted to be your host and moderator for today. So our topic for today is semigration to the Western Cape. Unlocking the potential, blessing or burden for the South African and the Western Cape property market. And along with our four real estate stakeholders today, and more about them, and also the topic a bit later. And I will introduce you to them shortly. But first, some housekeeping. There will be a recording of the webinar, which will be made available to all registered attendees after the webinar. And those who have not registered for the webinar, it will be available. That's the recordings on the rei.co.za website, and for our newsletter subscribers tomorrow morning. Otherwise, it'll be on the REI website. You just go to the education tab, click on event replays, and select your webinar choice for viewing at your leisure. So I encourage all of you, our valued audience, to actively participate and interact with us during this webinar. It is an interactive discussions. So if you have any questions for the panel, please don't hesitate to ask. You just submit your questions throughout the webinar for us to pose to our panelists today. You just simply type your question in the Q&A box. It's located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Not the chat box, that's for general comments. So we'll deal with your questions during the webinar and our Q&A panel discussion in the final session. So without further ado, let's move on to the heart of today's discussion and our investment webinar on semigration to the Western Cape, blessing or burden for the South African and Western Cape property markets. So we will delve into the phenomenon of semigration. It's a growing trend where individuals and families are making the move within South Africa to different provinces, and we'll dissect the impact and scope of semigration to the Western Cape, which has been a subject of intrigue for many, and especially in the property industry, who is benefiting from this. So we've also seen the Western Cape property market see a big uptick, remarkable surge in semigration stats, reflecting the significant migration of families to Western Cape and also other coastal regions, which has benefited the property market. So after the 5 years, numbers have surged. We've around about 31 to 46%, signaling a complete shift in lifestyle and a quest for improved governance. So hopefully, by the end of today, you'll get to understand the dynamics and opportunities presented by experts on semigration here in South Africa. So let me introduce you to our panelists. First of all, Estiani Marx. She joined Lightstone in 2016 as a business development manager until 2018, and then she was appointed head of real estate. So Estiani, do you just want to briefly introduce yourself and greet the audience?
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the opportunity again. Always great to be here. So looking after the real estate division at Lightstone, so predominantly sales, rental support, and then what does the market do? So that's what we do, and delighted to share some insights again today.
Great having you on, Estiani, and I'm always intrigued by those stats, and I'm sure our audience is going to be intrigued by those stats as well. Our next guest is Nick Morgan. He's the founder and MD of Opportunity Private Capital, and his consistent aim is to add value by providing investors with alternate options for the highest returns possible while prioritizing the protection of invested capital. So Nick, you just want to introduce yourself to the audience as well, please?
Yeah, Neil, morning. Thanks very much. Hello to everybody. As Neil said, my name is Nick Morgan. I'm one of the founders of Opportunity Private Capital. I'm also a co-founder of a few other companies within the residential development and investment space. And just as a bit of a background, about 10 years ago, 2014, actually, we changed our business strategy, our company strategy, to focus only on projects, in development projects and investments in the Cape. And so with that background, this topic of semigration has got some real interest to us and to myself.
Wonderful. Great having you on the show here today, Nick. Our next panelist is John Jack. He's the CEO of Galetti Corporate Real Estate with a technology-led approach to corporate advisory and structuring. So, John, you want to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Thanks, Neil. Unlike everyone else, I'm actually advocating for the return back to Joburg, because I need to change my background over here. I think there's a lot to be said about Joburg, and a lot of sort of community and public engagement needed. And I'm from Cape Town, so I'm actually a Cape Townian. So yeah, we'll jump into it. But really, in the commercial space, we've got a commercial property services business.
Wonderful. Great having you, John. And I think it's very important to get balanced perspective from Gauteng as well, and to obviously have the narrative as well. So that's why we've got to balance the panelists here today. But great having you on board. Our next panelist is Warren Hewitt. He's the CEO of the Greater Tygerberg Partnership. And his aim is to build Bellville and the surrounds where investors and citizens are thriving, where they realize its true potential as a hub for economic development with advanced infrastructure, sustainable land use, and social integration. So, Warren, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hey, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be chatting with some esteemed guests, and nice to be back on the live show again. Thanks, Neil. Yes, the Greater Tygerberg Partnership is a not-for-profit company, but we focus really on urban regeneration in the northern suburbs of Cape Town, and promote the area as an investment and development destination, following quite a significant change in the northern suburbs, specifically Bellville. And we're now reigniting that as a destination for investment and for residential and commercial property owners. Yeah.
Awesome. Great having you on the show as well, Warren, to get your perspectives. And so moving on. So, Estiani, I think we're going to start off with you, because I know that you've got some stats to show us to set the scene, because I think it's very important that, first of all, people understand what is the dynamics, what is really happening out there. There's a lot of stats, there's a lot of quotes and that kind of stuff. What is really happening from the Semigration perspective? And I know you've got a brief presentation that you're going to take us through. So I'm going to hand over to you to take it off from here, to just do the intro and really set the scene and take us through those incredible stats. So over to you, Estiani.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. Just to confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, 100%.
Good. All right, so I think for us today, we're going to look at some stats around the country specifically, and then looking at the semigration piece towards the Western Cape. So last time I shared quite a bit around the property landscape, so understanding where majority of properties are based and those kind of things. And for those that were there will remember that I said that in Gauteng, obviously we have the most registered residential properties, and second to that, the Western Cape. So just to keep that in mind as a bit of background. All right, so semigration trends, if we're looking at the provinces that people are actually moving to, so here we can clearly see that Cape Town has actually seen a massive increase in people moving towards that province, and it's also the only province that have seen a constant increase in people moving towards a specific province. So that's really interesting to note. All the other provinces, however, have experienced kind of a decrease in terms of the number of people moving towards those provinces. So as per the data that you can see over the last 5 years. So then if we look at semigration trends from provinces moving from, so people moving out of a specific province, we can again here see that Gauteng has actually seen the biggest percentage of movement out of a province, and this notion seems to really like increase on an annual basis, looking back from 2018. And there's also been a bigger percentage of people moving from the northwest this year, as you can see in terms of the green bars there. So 6% for the last 5 years. This year, we've already seen a little bit of an increase there from people moving out of the northwest province. And then also KZN. I think that's also for quite obvious reasons, but we also did see a bit of an increase there for KZN. Then if we look at Cape Town, Mpumalanga, so Cape Town being the red bar, Mpumalanga, the Eastern Cape at the bottom, and the Free State have actually seen a little bit of a decrease in terms of people moving out of those provinces over the last 5 years, or specifically the last year or two. Then if we look at where are people actually migrating to in terms of the town type. So are they moving towards the city, towards the smaller towns, those kind of understanding. And if we look at the trends that we display here, you can see that the migration towards migrating towards the metropolis seems to have dwindled down quite a little bit. If you can see from 2018, we looked at about 50% migration towards the metropolis. We've seen that decreasing down to about 45% in this current year, so year to date, 2023. And then also migrating towards the smaller, smaller cities, where we see a little bit of an increase there as well. And it does look a little bit different for different provinces, which we'll see in the next slide or two. But there seems to be a little bit of movement towards the smaller towns, and then also towards the larger towns as well. And then if we look at migration from metropolis seems to have increased quite a bit, or not significantly, but there's been an increase over the last 5 years, so from 64% to 66%. And we also see that in terms of the cities, so migrating from the cities, 12% migration from the cities in 2018, and that's decreasing down to about 10% in 2023. Now let's look at semigration trends in terms of the Western Cape. So I think this picture speaks for itself, and you can see that there's quite a bit of movement over the last 5 years, semigration towards the Western Cape. The numbers are quite massive, sitting at 13,000 households or movements in terms of 2022, whereas the migration from the Western Cape is actually quite low in comparison to the migration towards Western Cape. And then we also wanted to look at the type of migration in terms of towns, so specifically looking at the Western Cape itself. So we can see that there's even less people that are moving towards the metropolis, and more people moving towards the smaller towns. But we're also seeing fewer people moving towards the cities, whilst there's a higher number of people moving towards the larger towns as well over the last 5 years. So in the Western Cape, specifically, we see a decrease in the percentage of people moving from the metropolis, which is a different dynamic than most of the other provinces. But we also see a higher percentage of movement from the smaller towns as well. And then we wanted to look at, in terms of people semigrating to different types of properties, different sizes of properties. Are they upgrading? Are they downgrading? And this is super interesting to note. So if we analyze this a little bit better, we can see that on a national, and this is for a national level, we'll look at the Cape Town level after this, but on a national level, we can see that there's a high percentage of general upgrades in terms of size and value, and we see downgrades over the past 5 years. So if you can see let's look at just 2023, so 34.5% general upgrade, as opposed to only a 24.87% in terms of a downgrade, and that refers to both size and value. So what's very interesting to note, though, is that there are a much higher percentage of people that are decreasing in size, but opting for an increase in value as opposed to an increase in size, albeit a decrease in value. So it actually leaves us with the conclusion that people would much rather compromise on size than on value of property. And obviously that is because most people will see real estate as an investment opportunity, and not necessarily only to stay in that specific property. So on the next slide, we'll then have a look at what happens in terms of this kind of upgrade downgrade scenario in terms of semigration over the different provinces. And there you can see that It looks like if you look at Mpumalanga as an example, so we can see that there's a higher percentage of upgrades as opposed to downgrades. But then when we look at the Eastern Cape, there's actually a nice and equal split between upgrades and downgrades in that specific province. Then if we look at a majority of the size downgrade and value upgrades, which are happening actually in the Western Cape, and we know that for the value you pay in, let's say, Gauteng, you almost get half the size of that in the Western Cape area. So it doesn't seem to actually deter people from wanting to move to the Western Cape. So they're more than willing to compromise on size. And then if we look at Mpumalanga, Free State and Northern Cape, we actually see a bigger shift towards more space. So upgrades in size, even if that meant that there's a little bit of an increase or a compromise in terms of value. And then looking at movement towards and away from the three major provinces. So this also just brings a little bit of context to the discussion. So movement towards the Gauteng area. Quite a lot of people still moving in, not as much as we'd expected. So majority of people moving into Gauteng choose to move into the Pretoria, Sandton, Joburg, Centurion and Randburg area. And then if we look at people moving out of Gauteng, we can see almost a similar situation where majority of movement is out of Pretoria, Johannesburg, Sandton, Centurion, and Randburg. And then if we look at the KZN area, so most movement towards that area being Margate, Durban, Ballito, Kloof, and Salt Rock. And then movement out again, Durban, Pietermaritzburg, Margate, Kloof, and Richards Bay. Then if we look at Cape Town, so Cape Town, obviously movement towards it is much bigger than movement away from. But if we look at movement towards, majority being in your Cape Town area, second to that Milnerton, Mossel Bay, Somerset West and George. And that's also interesting. We've broken this down a little bit to see what property type that people are actually moving towards. And you can see in the Western Cape, there's a massive motion or notion to move towards living in estates. So that's quite a fundamental in most of those areas. And then also moving out of the Western Cape, obviously where the majority sits within Cape Town, but Cape Town, Milnerton, George, Mossel Bay, Bellville. And again, there we see a majority of movement away from estates, a little bit more in towards sectional titles and freehold. And then just ending off, I think in terms of stats, we also wanted to look at what's happening in the George area. So George being an area that's very topical, still falls within the Western Cape. And we actually did a nice summary of the top suburbs, top streets over the last, or at the moment over the last month when we had our seminars there. And as you can see, some great values obtained in some of the suburbs within George, specifically some of the streets as well. And then I think one of the most important aspects to look at is the return on investment or the house price growth that we actually do find in some of these estates as well. And that shows, again, why the demand is so high for estates altogether. So, Neil, that is my story. And happy to hand over to the next speaker.
Awesome. Great. Thanks very much, Estiani. I think that was really very interesting. And I think it was important to be able to set the scene there and to see, who are the beneficiaries, which are the areas which are benefiting from that. So incredible stuff. Thank you for that. And so moving on to Nick. Nick, you are a property developer in the Western Cape. I mean, how has the last year been from your business point of view, given the potential impact of Semigration?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. So we rely a lot on the data. We use a lot in formulating our analyses is leads converting to sales. So that's on the sales side. Then I want to talk about the investment side as well, because there's a very strong correlation in our business going back a number of years between the amount of leads that come in, which are quite closely monitored, and then resulting in sales in the development projects, as well as on the investment side. So I'll start with the sales. So interestingly enough, leads have gone up by 34% year on year. Now, that tells me a couple of things. Either that, there are lots of variables attached to this, but I would say that there's still a lot of interest in the market, which is why the leads are increasing, which perhaps infers a bit towards the semigration phenomenon, and that people are coming down and at least they are looking or inquiring or something to that effect. Sales, however, are down by 27% year on year. Now, this could be a number of factors. Interest rates are playing an important role in this. And it goes back to the lead stat. It's the first year where we've seen that the leads and the sales don't correlate in the same, moving in the same direction. So there could be a lag in terms of the sales. And what I mean by that is the sales cycle is 2 to 3 months generally. So what we find is last year, obviously, sales were up for the year. It came off a slightly lower interest rate base. Inflation was a bit lower at that stage. Now we're finding ourselves in an environment where the interest rates went up substantially in a short space of time. And I think there's a bit of a catch up at the moment where people are monitoring the situation, but they're still evaluating where this is going. Because until we get the next rate announcement, I think people are still a bit skeptical whether it's going to plateau or whether the interest rates are going to start coming down. And I think that has a big impact on their decisions to buy. So that's on the sales side. Conversely, on the investment side, and I'm talking about our capital investors who come in and part of the funding of development projects. Now, that funny enough, our leads are up 22% year on year. So there's been an increase there. Sales in terms of investments coming in is up 24%. So we've seen a decent correlation there, which we used to seeing over the years between leads and investments coming in. And what it tells me is that, and a lot of these investors are actually from out of the Cape. And it tells me that guys have confidence in the Cape in terms of investing in development projects, etc., in the greater Cape Town area, which again lends itself, I think, to either they're semigrating or their money is semigrating, one of the two. And so that's what we're seeing over the last year, Neil. So it's there's a bit of good and a bit of mediocre thrown in with that.
So I would think, and we can have a debate about that point a bit later. It's obviously the rental market that's mainly benefited as opposed to sales. I mean, it's been a tough year. You mentioned about interest rates and that kind of stuff. I mean, some of the stats that I've heard is like 20 people lining up for one property, and it's more one occasion in the Western Cape. So it seems there's demand, but in terms of sales, it's not going through. But John, I think let's move over to you, because you're mostly in the commercial space and also in the auctions business, and you're also based up in Johannesburg. So I mean, so what are you seeing from a Semigration perspective?
So it really impacts us. We have offices in Cape Town and Johannesburg, so I'm fairly agnostic as to where we're transacting. However, what we're seeing in Johannesburg, and there was a function that we went to recently with Growth Points, and one of their guys was saying that almost 50% more of this is an office specifically. So offices where you see a lot of your businesses obviously operate from offices, whereas industrial, there might be a specific reason why you manufacture in Johannesburg compared to Cape Town, or why you might distribute in Cape Town, why you might distribute in Johannesburg. It all follows the feet. Whereas businesses, it might be a financial services business could decide to base themselves in Cape Town, or a technology business could base themselves in Cape Town and still operate in Johannesburg, or put your head office in Cape Town. So you really look at the office market, and what we've seen there is a lot of people are opting to move their offices to Cape Town, but now you've got to start looking at where your people live and where your top talent comes from, and how you remunerate them, and like everyone's saying here, that the numbers are in Cape Town are far more expensive, and so you need to look at how people are remunerated to actually go and live in Cape Town, specifically around the City Bowl, etc. And, Nick, you were saying your leads are going up 30%. I think it's also got something to do with, and largely you were saying you develop in the northern suburbs. So what I'm seeing is a lot of that southern suburbs and inner city and that kind of thing, the prices are actually just getting unachievable for most people. And so these other areas are now becoming more and more popular as people start to grow out of that sort of very central node of Cape Town. So that could be another reason. Now I also see some of the Nedbank guys on here watching. So, they're also not releasing funding as easy as they were. So what we're really seeing is that when we run an auction, when we conduct an auction in Cape Town, the sort of bid offer spread, because it's live, the people arrive at their bid, the bid offer spread is really tight. Whereas in Johannesburg, your bid offer is like this. It might be a great tenant, it might be a great building, well developed, good area, etc. But the yields that are demanded now in Johannesburg, because the capital growth is being stifled, are much higher than, let's say, Cape Town, where you can still see capital growth. So that's what we're really seeing in the market, or specifically the auction market. And to go back to that, Growth Point example, they were saying that they'd seen 50% more deals done in the office space than office sector in the Cape Town office than they had in the Johannesburg office. Now, to put that in perspective, just the vacancy of their portfolio in Johannesburg is larger than the whole Cape Town portfolio. So just putting that into perspective, what they're trying to say there is that we're seeing a number of deals done in Cape Town, and you're starting to see, Reuters report came out recently. You'll see the actual growth in office rentals, A-grade office rentals, central Cape Town, 13%. Whereas in Johannesburg, you're probably seeing a 20% decline.
Wow. Those are really interesting stats and scenarios that you've put out there, John. So thank you for that. And I think the debate continues. Warren, your mandate is promoting and improving investment opportunities in the northern suburbs of Cape Town, mostly being Bellville, second biggest metropole in the Western Cape. You're also working very closely with the Western Cape government. And so I'd really like to see, what are you seeing in your world that is making an impact on improving Western Cape prospects, given what everybody has said in their introductions?
Yeah, cheers, Neil. I think the reasons for the semigration primarily to the Western Cape are fairly obvious. I think there's a lot more stability around municipal and provincial government. I think there's a lot more activity. 2 levels of load shedding makes a massive difference to any manufacturing environment. So the reasons for the semigration specific to the Western Cape, I think, are fairly obvious and don't need huge debating. But things like job creation, the Western Cape are creating an enormous number of jobs, and the semigration trend doesn't only, and Isiani, thank you for those stats, but it doesn't encompass the entire movement of people around the country. And we have a massive amount of less formal blue-collar workers shifting into the Western Cape because they're seeing job opportunities, which automatically drive service demand, as well as residential, and then additional demand on infrastructure support. So all of that is happening, which is falling outside of those stats, which we saw a bit earlier. And I think that's almost unaccounted for because of this informal economy that's shifting into the Western Cape. But the provincial and municipal governments are recognizing the trend. They've picked up the population growth over the last while. They're creating infrastructure development and capital development budgets, which are far exceeding any other province. So they're recognizing the need for infrastructural investments in the Western Cape, and very specifically in areas like the northern suburbs, Bellville, Parow, the Voortrekker Road, and some of the periphery areas where there is space and there is bulk for development opportunity. And affordable housing is going to be one of those big drivers. It really is.
Excellent. Okay, so Istiani, coming back to you now. I mean, it was very interesting in your presentation. You were talking about people are prepared to sacrifice size, because we see the houses in Johannesburg are certainly a lot bigger than in Cape Town, and you're getting sort of far more bang for your buck, but they're getting value, and obviously the values are a lot higher, so people are compromising on size. And then the other thing is, since Western Cape's been a big beneficiary of Pretoria people. I don't know, Pretoria loves Cape Town loves Pretoria, vice versa. Jacaranda City, which is quite interesting. And then, what John was saying, he was talking about, the sort of areas like your northern suburbs areas you know, your Somerset West that came out, your Milnertons, your sort of all your areas which generally are not your key sort of traditional Cape Town areas, which I found, you know, interesting. What are your thoughts around that? Why? And can we unpack that just a little bit more?
And can we just talk about Margate as well? I mean, Pretoria is
Yes,
obvious. Margate
absolutely.
is not obvious.
I think that's a great point there, John. So if you can maybe just comment on that, yeah.
Look, I think if you're talking about those specific areas as opposed to a Cape Town city like Sea Point, those kind of areas which are very prominent, I guess it boils down to pricing and cost, because obviously the properties in those areas are much higher price than the areas like your Milnerton, your Brackenfell. So those are the areas I think where people are still able to move towards, coming from a Pretoria or a Joburg or Gauteng altogether. So I think that's prominent, well, probably why people would rather move to those areas as opposed to the more prominent areas is because of price. Margate, again, I think it's because of affordability. So the market in KZN has really seen quite a massive decline in terms of price and value. Let's call it price, and which makes it a bit more affordable actually to buy in those areas. And then there's also a big drive in some of these areas, specifically Margate, I know, where there's a big drive to actually recover the town altogether. So I think the value is still to come, and some people are actually seeing the potential already, investing in those areas, and then hoping to get those returns in the near future. As we know, property is a bit of a longer term game, so it's not something you'll see immediately, but there's definitely some improvement and movement in that direction for that area.
Excellent. No, thanks for that. And I think, you know, I think it's sometime, and we're not going to be able to cover it in this webinar, but certainly going forward, I think we really need to unpack the rental market, because that's the market that's obviously where mostly people have benefited. So to say, well, where are people going? Where are they staying? And I'm also going to ask John just now to talk about the Airbnb market, because that has shot through the roof, because you had some interesting stats that we were talking on before the webinar, which I'd like you to share as well. So, so Nick, so I'm coming back to you. Where do you think the next year or two might be heading for the Cape from a residential property perspective?
Neil, I have a few theories, and the theories are backed up by a bit of data. So perhaps you'll indulge me, but I foresee that the Western Cape is going to see some real strong movement over the next 2 years. Can I share something? Probably help that a bit better, maybe illustrate my point.
Yeah, no problem.
Can you see that?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm just looking at data going back the last 20 years, and just something that we've looked at in the business. And what you see is there's an interesting correlation between the blue line is Cape Town house prices, the orange line is interest rate, and the gray line is CPI. Now, you see an interesting inverse correlation between, in the early 2000s, there was a low inflationary environment and a low interest rate environment. And you saw, obviously, we had that boom prior to the global financial crisis. Of course, then we see an incline in interest rates and CPI. And of course, the global financial crisis caused this major dip. Then there was a bit of plateauing. And once the interest rates and CPI leveled out a bit between, call it 2012 and 2018, this is where the Cape Town market really had a little mini boom of its own. And I think Estiani's probably got better stats, or got those stats, but those Cape Town was growing in double figures during that period. And I think that was really the beginning of the semigration time, probably from 2012, 2013 onwards. Then we'll see a little dip when Cape Town had that drought in 2018. There was certainly a dip in housing sales and value at that stage, and I think people got a bit negative. But at the end, and I just want to see, this is the actual interesting part. So we're looking at these different cycles. So this is what caught my attention, is at the moment, right at the end, this is up to Q4 2022. We're seeing an increase in interest rates and inflation. And Cape Town house prices have come down. So this is end of 22. I don't have the latest data. There's a bit of a lag on that. But I predict, just an opinion, that at some stage, the interest rates and inflation are going to start leveling out or coming down. And I think that we're going to see an upturn in Cape Town housing property. And why I say that is as follows, is Cape Town's doing better at the moment in comparison to the other provinces. But the growth, the year-on-year growth of the last few years in property is not shooting the lights out. It's steady at about probably 4, 5, 6% perhaps, if that. And Estiani are probably better served to tell us that. But Warren mentioned infrastructure. If the Cape can continue with its governance and infrastructure as it has been, then it's going to lay the foundation for an economic environment that could be buoyant. And I see these graphs changing shape again over the next few years, where Cape Town house prices start going up dramatically because of an increase in interest in there. And this next graph, sorry, I'll try and be quick, is the GDP growth in Cape Town from 2002 to 2022. And you'll notice that every time Cape Town house prices had a bit of a surge, it was when the GDP was higher than national. The orange line is national GDP growth, and the blue line is Cape Town. In the mid-2000s, GDP in the Cape higher, high property growth. Then 2011 to 2018, higher again, good property growth in the Cape. And we're seeing it again. This is up to the end of Q4 22, but you can see right at the end, there's starting to become a bit of daylight between the national GDP growth and Cape Town GDP growth. And that, I think that gap is going to widen, which again shows me certainly from an economic point of view that it's laying the foundation for a potential surge in the Cape economy and property values. And the last thing I wanted to show is, and Warren alluded to this in terms of employment, is unemployment doesn't directly affect property prices, but it does allude to semigration in a small way, because people who semigrate down to Cape, they bring businesses, they open businesses, they employ more people. Companies, if the economic environment in the Cape is good, companies get bigger, they employ more people. So unemployed people don't generally take part in the housing environment as such, except for renting, not so much buying. But I think as unemployment gets lower, then it seems to indicate that there might be an impact of semigration because of businesses expanding and employing more people. So Neil, for me, I just showed this because I think the data is quite interesting and may show some trends towards a very strong Cape and housing economy over the next few years.
Right. Can you just close your screen there quickly, Nick, just so that we can get back to the panelists? Thanks very much. This is very interesting stats. So, John, I mean, you're sitting back in Gauteng, and I know you're Cape Townian, and you said you're agnostic into it. Doesn't matter where the business comes from, which is great. Whether it's Cape Town, Flying, Joburg, it's all good. But here's Johannesburg. Where is Gauteng going? I mean, there's still a sentiment, and obviously we know most of it is based on service delivery. It's municipalities. We've got an election coming up, so they're going to have to kind of look at behaving themselves. Where's it going? I mean, a lot of us that have visited Johannesburg, which I'm a frequent visitor, and I'm sure the rest is, well, Estiani is sitting in Pretoria. So, and you know, where's it going? I mean, is it really falling apart? Is Cape Town going to become the big powerhouse, or is Joburg still the powerhouse?
Sure. So I can speak from sentiment a little bit in this perspective, and I think that's what it largely boils down to is sentiment. People are looking for better governance. They're looking for infrastructure. And really, what are people looking for? They're looking for a better life. That's what they want in the end of the day. So when you see crime, when you see pavements and litter, pavements that are broken and litter all over the place, when you see roads exploding in the CBD, when you see that sort of delivery, service delivery is failing and really no leadership in Johannesburg, that starts people to get a bit of a gripe and say, listen, there's more opportunity in Cape Town. There's GDP growth, which you say is creating employment. And so people just start to move. They vote with their feet, basically. And we see that sentiment in Johannesburg. And I've actually got a bit of a bee in my bonnet lately about this, because you can complain about it or you can do something about it. And I've been on the complaining side, not really doing anything about it. And our largest clients have up to sort of 60% of their capital base sitting in Johannesburg, or certainly Gauteng. And they need to protect that capital base. And from our perspective, our bigger offices in Johannesburg, and we need to protect our business at the same time. And of course, if these property values are declining and trade is declining and transactions are declining in Johannesburg, it provides business risk for us, but it certainly provides a hell of a lot of risk for the landlords. And so I started a process of investigating, is there anyone doing anything about this? Is there anyone improving? Are there any communities coming together? And it's unbelievable. I don't know if it's because, once you sort of start talking about it, you see more of it, but there's actually seems to be a movement where people are coming together and offering capital and offering their time and creating communities where they are taking over from government and municipality and partnering with municipality in a lot of these examples to improve the parks, to improve the pavements, to improve the signage, security, etc., etc. And that is becoming more and more prominent in Johannesburg. And I think what we'll see is we'll start to see an underpin given that community involvement, where we can actually start to turn around the spaces around us. Because I remember moving here in 2006 from Cape Town. 2010 from Cape Town, 9-10. And it was really a golden time in Johannesburg. There was a lot going on, and there's a lot of positivity and a lot of business, and really, the more people that move, the more empty houses, the less money, government has and municipality has. And so it starts the self-fulfilling prophecy, and less people are willing to actually put in their time and money to sort the situation out. And we're seeing people doing that, which is, pretty positive. And I'm certainly an advocate for it, that there's a lot of value to be had in Johannesburg. And it's a great environment. Just looking out of the window here, we've got all the jacarandas are in bloom, and it's just it's a great place to be. There's no wind as well, which I really.
Well, there's no wind today, Cape Town as well, so it's a beautiful sunshine day as well.
Neil, can I jump in there quickly?
Yes. Okay, yes, you can, because I want to give Warren a chance, because Warren he's the enabler that's already doing that. But I'm going to give you a quick comment before I'll
jump in after that. It's fine.
Okay, no problem. So it's a debate, guys. So I'm happy that you do jump in. I just want to give Warren the opportunity to respond, because Warren is leading the way, I think, in the northern suburbs. So Warren, tell us what you're doing, because maybe people are looking at the model. And in fact, just recently, we had a conference up in Johannesburg. We had a lot of government, a lot of municipalities called the Residential and Development Conference, which I want to get you all involved. Unfortunately, we had a lot of government department. We had no municipalities. So there's no buy-in from SALGA, the South African Local Government Authorities. You, Warren, are working exceptionally close to currently the only municipality with a clean audit that's doing things really well. So people are looking at you and saying, you're doing well. What is the secret recipe? How can we, what are you doing? And everything that John was talking about is what you are doing almost on a daily basis. Just share that.
Yes, Neil, yeah. So we're very fortunate that the municipality that we deal with, the city of Cape Town, have been very progressive and more progressive over the last 2 or 3 years than even before that. So the attitude towards regenerating areas, economic nodes, and they recognize 4 or 5 key economic nodes in the Western Cape, and certainly in the municipality that is Cape Town. from Mitchell's Plain to Khayelitsha to Belleville to the CBD to the sort of Milnerton corridor. So they recognize these as nodes, which are critical for development and investment attraction, but across the board. It's not just high-end residential. It's really creating those jobs and creating opportunities. So working with a municipality like it, as well as the Western Cape government, who are also very progressive in attracting and investing in infrastructure. And the city, I know, is earmarked 120 billion over 10 years. And that's just out of a city budget, not out of a provincial budget. So those kind of initiatives do work. I think creating stakeholders, and what John's talking about in community engagement and creating stakeholder forums for those kind of discussions to mobilize resources, a willing municipality is one thing. But they are still tied up in a lot of red tape and a lot of red progress. So working with private sector has probably created more opportunity for us to mobilize Belleville and Parow and the Voortrekker Road corridor, and getting the community stakeholders engaged in place-making initiatives, creating opportunities for investment, promoting those initiatives, and then sharing that information as widely as possible. So those kind of things can be done, whether it's in Durban, whether it's in Bryanston, in Johannesburg. Those things can be done by communities rallying together. A willing municipality is certainly a big bonus, though.
Okay, wonderful. And I think that's important to note. And I think certainly from, I think I'll say to John and to Warren, you've got to be at the Residential Development Conference. We even had Cyril Ramaphosa's assistants there. So they're looking in, there's a world, they're willing to do that. But I think Cape Town, Western Cape are leading the way. That's why everybody's going. It's a safer as it is right now. We're concerned. I mean, the announcement from Jordan Hill-Lewis in terms of, the budgets were significantly more. I think it's like 10 times more of what was announced in Gauteng, and the money is actually going into services and infrastructure, which is fantastic to hear, and we cannot be assured that that's happening in the other areas at this stage. But I'm going to just, it's now open season, everybody. So we're going to have a discussion right through to the end, and also to the audience, if you've got questions. And I know we've got a couple that we're going to answer here. So it's open debates and everything. I know you wanted to make your point, Nick, before I really interrupted you. Do you want to just add your bit? I think maybe on the tail of what John was saying, or on the tail of what Warren was saying.
Neil, I'm used to being interrupted. My wife does it often. Just onto what John was saying. He mentioned earlier about Growth Point's portfolio in terms of Gauteng being so big compared to the Cape. And it strikes me that, and he's talking about all the community involvement, it strikes me that the big business leaders in Gauteng have to start pulling their weight. And I mean, they can't slow down anymore. They need to pull their weight and start doing something, because if they don't, they've got massive investments that could just go down the tubes. So just in support of what John's saying, it looks like community involvement is going to be the order of the day up in Gauteng, for sure. Yeah. And then Estiani, just a quick question in terms of your stats. 2023, I saw there was, Cape Town, there was a bit of a lower move to the Cape than 2022 and 21. Is that perhaps just a lag in the stats for now? I mean, we're only sort of 3/4 of the way through 2023.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's year to date, but as you can imagine, that there's a lag in the deeds office in terms of registrations coming through. So we'll probably have a clearer picture of the 2023 year early in 2024. Yeah. But that surely doesn't seem to have slowed down, no.
Well, we hope the deeds office is open, because a lot of people there've been a lot of complaints about deeds officer getting things through on time. And
deeds office in Cape Town is absolutely firing on all cylinders at the moment. Neil, it's had its ups fantastic. And downs, but the last few months it's been very good.
Good. All right. So I want to come to some of the questions that we've got from the audience. A very relevant one for you, Estiani, from Brett Boyd. He says, are the Lightstone Semigration figures only taking homeowners into consideration who are semigrating, or does it include people who have moved and are renting too? Because the rental stats, as we said earlier on, we don't have access to that, but I'd love to actually see that in correlation, to the stats that you produce. So your response to that?
Yeah, so no, it's definitely around home ownership. So people moving from having home ownership in a specific province and then selling off and buying in another province. So it's not looking at the rental market at the moment, just home ownership.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I think we've got to do that for the next webinar. We've got to unpack those rental stats, and look, the commercial stats would be interesting as well, because I think you said, Warren, I mean, and John, we were talking about the whole employment scenario, because are there enough jobs going around in the Western Cape? And you would say yes, because it's the fastest growing. And I'm just going to throw in the discussion both you, Warren, and John, because John, you mentioned earlier offline and before we came online to the webinar about Airbnb stats. And so the Western Cape, we know that tourism is a massive job creator. So is that what you're seeing, Warren? Is that the kind of accurate? Are the jobs in the Western Cape? We're going to pull everybody here, but we want to also get businesses to settle here too. Just unmute yourself there, Warren.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Neil, thanks. Just to back up what John was saying earlier, you were talking about the hubs. Johannesburg is still a very critical hub for South Africa. Don't disregard it. It's way bigger than Cape Townians seem to think. And rushing down to Cape Town, believing that it's going to be as big and as bright and as active as Johannesburg, it isn't the case. It's a very different environment. And I think a lot of Esiani's stats talk to an age group from her website that is between 35 to sort of 60 that are migrating. So these are heading towards retirement people, not necessarily they're highly economically active. But job creation is vitally important. It really is. It's people, but also, and so on the industrial and manufacturing side, we're seeing a big demand in people who are moving factories from the more industrial areas of Johannesburg and KZN into industrial areas here, purely because it's a lot easier place to create your products for exportation or in local consumption. So industrial demand is moving businesses here, which then drags residential demand into the area. So that can't be disregarded either.
Okay, great point. I think great. John, just quote those stats you were talking about earlier in the Airbnb, and I mean, I don't know whether you actually have area specifics, because obviously Western Cape is a massive, and specifically the Cape Town per se for Airbnbs.
Yeah, so this is a morning note from an Investec, and so I'm not plagiarizing them. I give them full credit for the stats. However, they were talking about the revenue, Airbnb's revenue, so obviously rental coming through, was 23.5 billion in 2022. You know, I mean, it's a staggering number, but when you think about it, it's 115% increase from 2019. So it's a significant increase in Airbnb. And to your point on the rental market, I mean, the rental market numbers would be fascinating to look at, but people are really, really struggling to find property to rent because it all goes to Airbnb. They want the short term, so they might give you a 6-month let, but then over season they want their property back because the numbers they can achieve are significant. And so for people to try and find longer lets, certainly around Cape Town CBD and the Atlantic Seaboard, it's near impossible. And so those rental numbers would be fascinating, certainly in terms of rental growth.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's lots of questions coming in here, so we're going to try and deal with them all. Just for the anonymous attendee, there will be a recording, and for everybody else, absolutely, there's a recording. It will be available. If you registered for the webinar, you will get it. And if not, you just go to the REI website. So yes, prices of houses in the southern suburbs is extremely expensive. And we're talking the West, more than 20,000 Rand a square meter compared to the rest of the country. Is there a property bubble building, and will buyers achieve capital growth over a 5 to 10 year timeline, or is this just panic buying for the semigrating masses? Who wants to have a crack at that one? I know it's more of a property related question. Anybody, any takers for the auctioneer first, Mr. John?
I can jump in there anecdotally. I'm not sure I can help with southern suburbs data per se, but I would. Look, southern suburbs property has been expensive for a long time. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. You know, it's you know, those suburbs are sought after. There hasn't been a lot of, except in the Claremont business node, there's not been a hell of a lot of densification in those areas. So it's still quite full title property and leafy and suburban. So I think, and that's probably where it's going to stay for a while. So I'd imagine that those prices, I don't think it's a bubble as such. I think those prices have generally been high, and they're going to stay high because there is a limited supply, and you're going to get people who can afford to go there and live there, and that's going to buoy those prices to a large extent. As I said earlier with some of the data, is I think there's certainly a decent housing surge coming over the next year or two in the Cape, but I don't think it's relegated just to the southern suburbs.
Right. Warren, I see you got your hand up there.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Neil. To back up what Nick was saying, it's the house prices in the southern suburbs specifically in that belt are becoming harder and harder to try and justify the value per square meter, whether it's 20,000 or whatever it is. It's becoming very difficult to justify that kind of investment and any potential return. We see quite a big variance between rental returns on purchase prices in Cape Town versus Johannesburg, and it's quite disparate in relation to the actual property price. What we're seeing in our area, and specifically some of the periphery areas, and I saw Milnerton was one of the big demand areas, but those periphery areas to the CBD of Cape Town and the southern suburbs of Cape Town do have value. So you have properties there that have been stagnating for a long period of time, drifting along the CPI, that are now suddenly seeing quite a big pickup in demand and pushing prices up significantly into sort of the high-end single and double-digit figures. Yeah.
Well, you look at Rawson's just announced a new development that they're doing just on that fringe of Pardon Island, moving out of Cape Town. So when you start seeing the likes of big developers like that building, residential property there, they see value. You start to see what's going to happen to that fringe. But I tend to agree with you. And the question I've always had is, it starts to get to an affordability, because no GDP growth, and you've got people who need to earn and increase their earning, but you don't see a lot of that increase in wages per se, but people have to afford these properties which are increasing at significant value. So how many people can actually afford to stay in those areas? And I 100% agree. I think the periphery areas are going to see the major growth. When Nick's developing that's going to see the growth. That's the area to be in.
Absolutely. And I think we just have to look in Johannesburg, in areas like Bryanston, all these massive houses all being converted into multi-complexes. And the same things happen in the Western Cape. You go to areas in Constantia, you go into Rondebosch. We're seeing all these areas in the southern suburbs. We're talking 2,000, 3,000 square meter properties, which are just far too big for there. And all of a sudden, there's a double story with 6, 7, 8 to 10 units. So that seems to be the new way going forward. And people's eyes are opening and sort of following that. As Prof. Aruli says, the market in South Africa is between 850 and 1.2 million. That is a sweet spot. So for anybody who's in property development, it's kind of like, if you're not in that sweet spot, we could probably go a little bit higher. So, but certainly that's where it is right now, obviously, given the challenging times we have with interest rates and that kind of thing. Yeah. So just one more comment. There's from Mark. He's asked, my question is, what is this panel regarding the longevity of the semigration trend? Will it continue? Will it speed up after the 24th layer? Will it slow down? Because it's a very good question, because semigration is not a South African story. It's happening in the US. The people move from colder cities into warmer cities in the South and that kind of stuff. And there is semigration within even the US. Now it's driven by very, very different trends, post-COVID, that kind of stuff. People realize they can operate from home. So anybody who's got a comment on that, I don't know if you just an extension.
We don't even talk about immigration. This is a semigration. Yeah. What about immigration? And the number of people immigrating are also quite significant. Those stats, Estienne, you must also have, selling for immigration reasons. So, and a lot of them probably from Joburg, but, not to be mean to Joburg, because I think there is significant value. If you're getting 15,000 Rand a square meter in Joburg, you're doing pretty well. And so, you see the much bigger houses, etc. But it is a question of, they say, will this continue? Everything equalizes. Every market equalizes. So it will equalize. You can't, you think, what Warren was saying earlier, you don't understand how big Johannesburg is and how much economy is in Johannesburg. It is really significant. So is it going to switch off and move to Cape Town? no, it's just going to equal.
There's a good comment here for one of our attendees. He's from Brett, and he said Semigration will continue for as long as service delivery is failing. So very interesting. So
Neil,
Johannesburg gonna have to turn that around.
Neil, to actually
Yes.
answer that question as well. So
Yeah,
is John's right. Obviously things plateau ultimately. I mean, you don't go up for an indefinite period. But I think it's a political question largely. And so I'll put our political cap on and say everyone go and vote in the next elections, because it's going to have a hell of an impact to your livelihood, your way of living. And the bottom line is this: if the Cape Town continues for the next 5 years with the same level of governance or better, Semigration is going to continue to some extent, depending. I don't know if it'll be as steep in terms of the percentages, but if Joburg's political situation doesn't change, it's going to, I think, force a rethink to a lot of people, unless the private sector goes in with some big bucks to sort it out.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Okay, gentlemen, look, and ladies, we've come to the sort of bewitching hour, believe it or not, but there's a couple of questions I want you to handle. It's the last one I want to handle before I'm going to give each one of you the wrap. I'm maybe going to ask you to deal with this, Warren. It's related to Airbnb. There's a new paper going to Parliament on Airbnb in South Africa and Cape Town. Will the Cape Town municipality allow this or restrict Airbnb? And I know internationally there are a lot of restrictions too in cities, so it's not only a South African story. I don't know if you've got any insight into that, Warren?
Neil, I actually don't, so I can't give any empirical answer on that. I do know there were conversations where the city of Cape Town were looking at models that had taken place in Europe, specifically in the restriction of Airbnbs and what they were doing, which has probably triggered the discussion point around a white paper, but I don't have any idea in terms of the direction that they're going to head in. I doubt very much that they'll head towards a banning of that stature.
Okay. All right. So I think it'll just be more regulation, more control, that kind of thing, as opposed to any sort of ban. I just know the paper would be more restrictions in terms, but I think control restrictions. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the table. There's one comment that I'm just going to throw into in which you could add into your parting shots in your closing comments. And I think it's a very important one from Trish. She's talking about informal people moving in for jobs, and also to informal settlements, because we've forgotten about that sector of the market, and there's busloads of people still coming in. And I know, Warren, you might even have some of that. But what I'm going to do is, in closure, Estiani, being the lady, I'm going to ask you to close off first, and maybe just give your thoughts, your comments, your parting shots, leaving people with something they can take away. And I think it's been such an enlightening discussion. I think it's great. We've got to do part 2, part 3, part 4, because I think we need to unpack this a little bit more, need to understand what are those dynamics. So your parting shots, your final thoughts.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I mean, this is great conversation. I think the one thing that we probably could look at in a part 2 is looking at foreign buyers with into the Western Cape area, because I think that also drives the prices quite a bit, because obviously they have the ability to pay a little bit more, and it'll be interesting to see how that drives demand in the Western Cape. So yeah, I think that's the next
and rental figures. Mustn't forget the rental figures. So what we do is the buy and sell figures, the figures of movement of people, and I think rental, we'll bring that in. Okay, so Nick, thanks very much, Estiani. It's wonderful having you. Everybody give her a round of applause. Been fantastic.
Pleasure.
Nick, your closing thoughts, parting shots.
Closing thoughts. Go Boca.
Good. Yes, we all support you there.
So my crystal ball says that when if the macroeconomy can settle down a bit, and I'm talking about load shedding seems to be settling, but I think it's got a lot to do with probably people going onto solar. I'm not in that space. I can't really speak to it. Yeah, or election. Yeah, exactly. But I think if the macroeconomy can stabilize a bit, interest rates can come down a bit, inflation can get under control, then I think the Cape is going to be in for a hell of a good couple of years going ahead. And the other part of that crystal ball would say, Bokke by 4.
Awesome. Love it. Well, we know the bomb squad is back, 7-1. So that's really good news. Very exciting. And I think great for the sentiment of the country.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
so,
Neil, sorry, lastly, thanks very much for
yes.
having me, and nice to chat to the other guys on the
yes,
panel.
well, we'll
Cheers.
see everybody,
Thanks.
I'm sure, in part 2 at some stage. John, do you want to give your closing thoughts there, your parting shots?
Yeah, Neil, again, similar to Nick, thanks for having us. It's been a great chat, but I think that to my point, we'd really like to hear from people or organizations that are actually starting to put their money where their mouths are and coming together as communities, and also investors and landlords, etc. We'd love to hear more from those people. I certainly would. And we're going to be working with our clients to see where we can actually invest best. Where do you get the best bang for buck in terms of improving Johannesburg?
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, John Jack from Galetti. Thank you very much. And Nick Morgan from Opportunity Private Capital. We haven't forgotten about you, Warren, because you got the last word. You've got the absolute last word, and it's probably to your advantage, Warren. So your parting shots. So
cheers, Neil, and cheers, guys. First and foremost, I'm a South African, so we mustn't disregard the importance of all the cities around our country. They all really play a very key role. And so they shouldn't be disregarded. As much as Gauteng are seeing a massive semigration and migration out of their city, it really is an important node for the country. Service delivery becomes everything. And where service delivery fails, the responsibility falls on the private sector and individuals to start. We're very resilient as South Africans. So we need to then group together and find solutions to lay the foundation for being able to create those jobs and be able to create that sort of investment platform. It's what we're doing in this area. We're very fortunate, I'll say, to have a willing municipality, but it can be done with just the communities and the private sector to rally around and create those opportunities.
Awesome. Great stuff. Great final words. And Estiani Marks of Lightstone, Nick Morgan of Opportunity Private Capital, John Jack of Galetti, and Warren Hewitt of Greater Tiger Partnership. Thank you very much. Thank you for your valuable insights. I think it was a great discussion. It's really been truly eye-opening for everybody. To our audience, we really appreciate your active participation. We will see part 2 and engagement. Been fantastic too. And just before we close, I want to remind our audience of our next webinar. We got one on Tuesday, the 7th of November. There will be a link in the bottom that should pop there. If my colleague will just pop that there it's going to be empowering South African families. Unfortunately, this one is about EB5 and immigration, but then we come back to South Africa, and then we do the South African Property Author Series. And then we're looking at the distressed property market. So the property series is next Thursday, the 9th of November. Tuesday, the 14th is the distressed market. And there's going to be lots more before the end of the month up until the end of November. They're all free. You just register. You just click on the link below. Come to the upcoming events on the rei.co.za website. So yes, there will be a recording for this. So first and foremost, my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for being an integral part of today's event. Your insights were exceptional. I think it really was a great discussion. And as we gear up for our electrifying showdown this weekend between the Springboks and the All Blacks in the Rugby World Cup final this evening, I say go Bokke. So I also got that opportunity as well, Nick. The significance, I think, of winning the Rugby World Cup cannot be overstated. It is a pivotal moment that will shape the future and success of our nation. And I hope you all back that up. And we really look forward to that. And so for everybody, until we reconvene for our next webinar on Tuesday the 7th, this is Neil Peterson, along with my esteemed panelists, signing off for the parting words. Stay safe, and may your investments bring you boundless success. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Cheers.
Thanks, Neil. Cheers, chaps.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.